Hello, Robert and all. As you're getting ready to start your session, the last session just ended, so people will be coming in from the main stage shortly.
That's great. That's very helpful contextual information. So that's good to know. So we will definitely hold for a few minutes for everyone who's joining. Just ask for your patience as we allow time for people to leave the main stage and come here. That's great. Thanks very much for that. So Dylan, is your take that the flow has slowed and we should get started at this point?
I would go ahead and get started.
Yeah. Okay, great. Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. I imagine there'll still be some people trickling in from the main event. And so you have joined the Investing in Leadership and Management to Catalyze Progress Against the SDGs. I'm Robert Newman. I'm the Executive Director of AMP Health, and really looking forward to the opportunity for you to hear from our fantastic speakers today, but more importantly, to engage in conversations that we hope will sort of at least catalyze some thoughts about a way forward, about our sort of call to action from this group. Maybe I'll start with, a bit of a story for just why I'm so passionate about this topic. I'm a pediatrician. I've spent most of my life in global public health, much of that in sort of technical arenas, in different sorts of organizations, CDC, WHO, Gavi. It was during the time that I was director of the Global Malaria Program at the World Health Organization in 2010, where I suddenly had an aha moment. And I realized, we are so focused on the technical aspect of what we're doing, on the commodities, on the infrastructure, that we'd forgotten about people. And that I knew malaria programs that had been 6 people when they were $100,000 programs, and now they're $100 million programs and they're still 6 people. And most of them are technical people like myself. And we in medical school didn't get leadership and management training. I had this moment, and that flame has sort of burned inside me for the last dozen years, that we were sort of missing the main piece, that leadership and management was sort of the missing SDG, as the thing that really is required if we're going to be successful across all these ambitious goals, not just in health, but across all sectors. And you'll notice that our panel today, when I introduce them in a second, is diverse and across a range of sectors. So, while we're making great progress against the SDGs, and I think there's a lot to be celebrated and a lot to be optimistic about, despite the many things that are wrong in the world, there's a lot that's gone right, but the speed is not sufficient to deliver on the targets, and some of them, very urgently off track. I think we all realize that so much of, the resources we have, both human and financial, are precious, whether those are domestic resources or international resources put towards efforts, particularly in lower resource settings. Those resources are scarce. And so the stewardship of them, the efficient stewardship of them, is essential. And that also just, brings us back to the issue of leadership and management. So if we really are going to accelerate progress against the SDGs, then investing in leadership and management has to be seen as a front and center part of that, not a nice to have, as it's often seen as, but actually a must have. And so with that in mind, a few years ago, we got it in our heads to convene a high-level council on leadership and management for development. And the idea was to catalyze a global conversation around the role of leadership and management in driving progress towards achieving the SDGs. And the council is an incredible group of people made up of senior leaders from around the world, former heads of state, former ministers across various sectors, health, education, agriculture, finance, environment. And that group worked very closely together to develop a report that was released in November of last year that makes a very strong case for investing in public sector leadership. And the title of the report is Investing in Public Sector Leadership and Management to Accelerate Sustainable Development. And Dylan will be sharing a link in the chat just now where you can download the report if it's not a report that you've already seen. You know, we're going to have a free-ranging conversation today. So it's just about the report, but certainly we are trying to make people aware of this, aware of the work of the council, aware of this report, and think about how we can work together to get this message out across sectors on the importance of leadership and management. And I think, you know, you'll be hearing from the panelists today about that in plenary, and then we'll have an opportunity to have you in breakout sessions to talk about that. So I want to introduce, you know, our tremendous panelists today. You know, each of these are tremendous leaders in their own right. So we have Heather Anderson. Heather is the CEO of the Global Health Corps. She began her career as a management consultant in the private sector. And since joining Global Health Community, she's held positions at Engender Health, Planned Parenthood, and Global Health Strategies before taking up her current position at GHC. Just to comment on Heather's background, I think points to another important issue here is, you know, this isn't just, you know, we're talking about public sector leadership, but the cross-pollination between private and public sectors is critically important. We have Fatoumata Nafo. She's the former Minister of Health for Mali. She's held a number of leadership positions in global health beyond just being a minister, including as Regional Director of Africa at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Executive Director of Rollback Malaria. It's a great honor during my tenure. I was director of the Global Malaria Program when she was executive director of RBM. It was a great privilege to work with Fatoumata in those years, and also as country representative for WHO in Ethiopia and the Republic of Congo. We have Manuel Pulgar Vidal. He's global leader of climate and energy at World Wildlife at WWF and former Minister of the Environment of Peru. Manuel is also a member of the High-Level Council on Leadership and Management for Development, so is actually joining us today in that capacity as well as one of our council members. And finally, we have Margarita Sanz, who is the CEO of Enseña for Colombia. Margarita has extensive professional experience in managing educational, social, and peace-building projects in the public sector. So again, a real privilege to have all of you joining us today for this conversation. So the first part of this, the first sort of, 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to do just a few questions for these panelists to kind of get you situated in the way they're thinking about these issues before we kind of go into breakout. And so the first question is for Manuel. And Manuel, why do you think that the call to invest in better public sector leadership is particularly important right now, given what's going on in the world? So over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Look, it is more than important. And it is true, Robert, that this session, it is not to discuss about the report, but I suggest all the participants to check and to read that report. It is a fantastic one. And I am going to use some of its elements to reply or to answer your question. The reason it is because we are in a time in which we must navigate in constant change. And that is a strong reality of the current world. But also in a time in which are emerging nationalism and polarization. So the times are very difficult around the world. This is not an issue of Latin America or Europe. It is around the world. We are suffering because of the same. We are in a time in which we must deliver, and I'm going to explain why I am reinforcing the idea to deliver, and also in which we don't need to have a more multi-sectorial, multi-approach to the different challenges that we are facing. And finally, because we now are in a digital time in which information it is every second flowing actively, and it is very difficult to take decisions based on that and to identify what is that high quality information that we should take into consideration. So that is one side to answer your question. But the second one, probably more concrete, it is because we are in different times. We are in a time in which, fortunately, we have defined globally a collective vision for the world. I am mostly focused on climate. It is clear that the world has agreed that we shouldn't raise temperature in more than 1.5, that to do that, we do need to have an economy that it is net zero in emissions and resilient to climate change by 2050. We do know that to do that, we have to halve emissions by 2030 and to work for transitions suggested by science, the energy, the industry, the building and infrastructure, and the land use, forest, and agriculture. So those times of constant change are now framing in a new vision. But on the other hand, we are in time of emergency. Emergency, unfortunately, it is becoming the new normal. The emergency of the pandemic, the emergency of the war. And the point it is, what should we do from the public sector to avoid to have the collective vision and our process towards sustainability be derailed because of the emergency and the crisis? And that is also an important element. Also, we're in a time in which the economy process and the social process, it is a different one. We are entering into a time in which the economy, it is dramatically changing because probably mostly of the SDGs and the climate. A former president of Chile said some weeks ago, that we are in a time in which GDP is becoming not the most important way to measure competitiveness. It is the volume of carbon. And it is true. Now it is more important how effective are your process and how effective are your processes and your policies. So that is really, really important. And also we are in a time in which the social demand, the social request, and the activism of the youth have grown. Now we have Friday for Future. So they are demanding for different leaders from the public sectors. But also we are in a time in which we need leaders to define plans and to keep the vision alive. Let me say something that for me it is so important. I am fully sure that we can sort the crisis of polarization and nationalism that are emerging around the world by having leaders in the public sector that can keep the traction to achieve the midterm and long-term vision. Those are the leaders that the world needs now. That will be the way in which, by the end, I am optimistic by nature, we will achieve our objective.
Thank you so much, Manuel. And I think, this thread that you just touched on of the type of leaders, the sort of, servant leadership, values-based leadership, which is, I think, a big thing that you and the other council members brought out in the report, is very, very nicely expressed. Want to turn now to Heather. Heather, you started working in global health after spending your early career in the private sector. And can you tell us a bit about that journey? It's one I did in reverse at some point. And how do you respond when asked to quantify the value of leadership?
Sure. Well, great. Well, thanks again, Robert, for having us. Thanks for all the panelists and for folks joining. And yes, as you shared, I did start my career in the private sector. And, I can say too, so this is me, like 22 years old. And it was with a company that really prioritized investing in their staff at all levels with trainings, with workshops. So that was something that, I saw very early in my career and had the opportunity to receive. But admittedly, after 6 years of management consulting, I really decided to follow what had always been my passion, and that was really for gender equity. And so, much to the chagrin of my father, I quit my job in Chicago. I drove a U-Haul truck across the United States, landed in Washington, D.C., and after something like 40 informational interviews in 8 weeks, I started this new career path working at Planned Parenthood Global. And so really sort of continued, and for these past 20 years, sort of in this world of working in global health, and what in a variety of roles and organizations that I worked with, both globally or here in the US, I realized that there was a chronic underinvestment in leadership and management, which felt and was seen as in very sort of stark contrast to what I had experienced and benefited early in my career. And so this really seemed like such a missing piece of the puzzle, what was needed to really move the needle, to make more change, and just there weren't that many people talking about it. And so when I learned about Global Health Corps 10 years ago, I was inspired by the vision. I was inspired by the co-founder, Barbara Bush. I was inspired by the amazing team who were working at the time. I signed on as head of programs and haven't really looked back. And about Global Health Corps, for those of you that aren't familiar with our work, for the past more than a decade now, since 2009, we've built a whole community of more than 1,100 next generation leaders who are fiercely committed to building equitable health systems. Specifically, our work has been in Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia, in the US, but really also sort of beyond that as well. And through our fellowship and alumni program, we really focus on seeding the health sector with rising leaders and invest in them to grow and collectively transform health systems across their careers. Because at Global Health Corps, we fundamentally believe that if you do reach people early in their careers, that this is an investment that can pay off for decades. And that we also believe that we really need, as a sector, and as broadly more focusing on SDG and across sectors, we need more proximate leaders, we need more women, we need more leaders from the global South. And so this is where, as an organization, we focus our recruiting and efforts on. I think the last piece sort of about GHC2 is that we also focus on bringing into the sector non-clinical talent. And this was really informed from our early days as an organization when we were having conversations with ministries of health or grassroots organizations or INGOs, like, what do you need to be building resilient and strong health systems? And while yes, doctors and nurses are absolutely needed, they really were talking about how hard it was to find and source talent who had expertise in supply chain or technology or communication skills, programmatic skills. So that's really where we have focused on our specific niche and sort of building this diversity of skill sets. And now, again, so since 2009, we have these fellows and now alumni that are serving as the backbone to many leading health organizations that you're all probably familiar with. We have 30 alums and fellows at Partners in Health. We have a dozen at Last Mile Health. We've had 12 generations of fellows at Mass Design in Rwanda. And, as we focus on how leaders lead, really our curricula is focused on what we've seen as sort of undervalued, but critical, particularly even more so these last couple of years with the pandemic, of skills of collaboration and humility and entering in with empathy, let alone sort of adaptiveness and innovation, and really using a systems and design thinking approach. And so that's been really core. So that's a little bit GHC to give us framing. So the second part of your question, Robert, was like, how do we quantify our impact? This is always like the big question. And, for the past 10 years, as I've been part of GHC, I've had a lot of time and opportunities to reflect and think about how do we define progress and success and impact in this work. And, I think for all of us, as we're collectively thinking about our goals through the lens of the SDGs, of a just and equitable world, like, it's complex. If it was a silver bullet, it would have been figured out by now. And, even tackling any of the goals alone is significant in that, as we all know, no one can do it alone. And we can't even do it within the span of quarters in a year or even individual years. We can make progress now, but I think it's also important to look what is coming down the road. And so, for the right question for organizations like Global Health Corps, which has built talent pipelines and is supporting the reach and collaboration and influence of this community of leaders, our perspective is that measurement is not with how many lives are saved, which has really often been the traditional model, particularly in the health sector, but what is the impact? And sort of using an impact lens allows us to value both individual and collective leadership. It allows us to account for the ripple effect of leadership and also for our ability to take stock of how much leaders can have an outsized impact for those around them. And I can say for us 10 years in as an organization, we did our own sort of impact assessment. Externally, it was done by Dr. Amy Lockwood. And, we found from this assessment on the quantitative side that our program was, the people that had gone through the program, they were almost twice as likely to stay in the field of global health and social impact compared to those who had been Global Health Corps Fellow finalists. So really sort of using a counterfactual of what is it to have gone through this program. We also qualitatively saw that there were significant levels of increase, that women, that particularly many of our African leaders reported an increased level of confidence to go through this program and being part of this community, alongside the importance of what it is to be part of a network of folks who believe in health as a human right, and also the reinforcement that everyone has a role to play in leadership, that it's not just the top, that at all levels of your career stages, that you yourself, coming from all different backgrounds, can make a difference. And so from there, I won't bore you all with our theory of impact and the data that we have been working towards, but it's really sort of been grounded on building this diverse community of leaders, and yes, thinking about and understanding where they are going in their careers, but also using more of a collective framework of how are they collaborating with each other, how are they influencing the field. And so after our first 3 years of collecting data, it's been exciting for us to see that 70% of our alumni do report collaborating together professionally, and another 70% are also reporting that they're influencing the field through their advocacy work, policy work, or other efforts. I heard someone recently referred to the Global Health Corps network as sort of the stickiest network that they've ever come across, in the sense of like, if you come across one Global Health Corps alum, they're like, there's probably not that many too far behind. So I will wrap this all with just a story of one of our All-Star alums, just to like give, to your point, Robert, a sort of a story that I would love to just say that Temi, who is an alum for our early days, she, after her fellowship, had a difficult birth and decided to leverage the GHC network to found Life Bank. And this is an organization that she founded in Nigeria that uses data and technology to deliver life-saving blood to hospitals. So really being able to sort of use her innovation and approach to doing this work. She pivoted during COVID to be able to do oxygen and PPE. She's now been the recipient of a number of awards, but really often says that it's been this grounding of being part of a network that brings change. So I'll wrap it up there. And just to say, I think as we're all talking about this importance of equipping people with the skills and the resources needed to transform systems and mindsets. And it's going to take our work together. So back to you, Robert.
Thanks very much, Heather. And just to pick up a couple of threads before turning it over to Fatimata, I think one of the things that you mentioned, I think is or there's several things you mentioned that are very much part of the report. And one is this investment that the private sector makes in people. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to bring through into the public sector is this isn't going to happen by magical thinking. It takes investment, right? And, and we really, the report argues that the sort of benchmark that companies spend per year on average in investing in their employees should be met in the public sector as well. And that the return on that investment will more than pay for itself. And so I think that, that's something that you really highlighted. I think the issues of gender, and that's a big piece of the report is really working to make sure that the opportunities for leadership are gender, and that we don't just see leadership, as you say, as just the top rungs. Leadership is something that needs to be seen throughout. And certainly something for us in AMP Health as we work with whole teams in government, really thinking of entire teams exerting leadership. And you mentioned this issue of sort of individual and collective leadership, and I think those are both very important. Fatoumata, it's again pleasure to have you here today. Since your term as Minister of Health, a pretty big job, you've dedicated your time to a range of advocacy efforts, and your work with rollback malaria and IFRC. You interacted a lot with ministers and with heads of state. We argue in the High-Level Council report that we need global leaders to make bigger commitments to investing in leadership and management skills if they're going to achieve the SDGs. It's not going to happen magically, as I said. How do we go about mobilizing, heads of state to make these kind of commitments? You've got a lot of experience at trying to mobilize people at that level, and I think everyone in this gathering today could benefit from your wisdom in hearing how we do that. Over.
Thank you, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me really congratulate the High-Level Commission for the visionary and excellent work they've done through this report on investing in health, in public sector leadership and management to accelerate, sustainable development. We all agree that leadership needs to be built at all levels and across sectors, and not a set of skills for only those who are in power. But having said that, if we need to succeed, it's critical to have a head of states on board for many, many reasons. And those need to show that the matter is important. If we say that the matter is important and we keep on saying it, people will be on board. And they have to have a vision on it and be committed. While being committed, they should be ready to allocate their own time and the resources to that. I've witnessed what late Prime Minister Meles has done in Ethiopia. They developed their own leadership and management training modules and roll it out from the top to the bottom, himself being among the trainers. So they train the first level group ministers, state ministers, and down to really high level managers and mid-level cadres, as well as district level people. That's really leadership. And I've seen what the late president of Chad has done in malaria control. On monthly basis, President Deby was the one leading the committee on accelerating malaria control in Chad, holding really every sector accountable, showing that that's a multi-sectoral approach. I've seen in my own country, President Toure, who was the chair of our National Committee for Polio Eradication for almost 10 years. When he became president, he decided to remain on and to be with the technical people to ensure that really actions are taken. And there are many examples in the Commission report as well. So, Rob, what I've learned from those many, many positions I've been in is that really many countries are managed on emergency mode. Longer term vision and planning, even though sometimes in place, are not properly followed. But investing in people requires time, passion, dedication, ambition to change. So few things that I'm looking at, some of them have been really also shown in your report is one, how can we have few head of states that share the vision and that are committed and have those to help us create a critical mass of head of states, and that can be done through regional, sub-regional, as well as continental levels entities that are really dealing with political peace and development matters. But if you are to deal with development matters, you can't do it without thinking of leadership and management and the efficient use of the resources that are available to us. The third, probably the third area I would be looking into is how do we convince some countries to have budget line for leadership and management? Because if you have budget line, even if at the beginning it will be small amount of money, you got time to talk to your partners and also to see where you can make some savings in your budget to be invested in that critical matter. I look at advocacy as an important thing also to be taken on board, because really we need to show to people what is the cost of inaction. What if we don't do it? If we don't do it, what will be the consequences? And COVID has shown to us that really it's not a matter of knowing the technicality of things. It's how do you bring and effort together to make sure that really we all together are working toward the same goal and objective. And we need, lastly, to create a kind of emulation between countries, incentivize. I was looking at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation that has spent many, many years in recognizing, awarding leaders in the continent. We may want really to work with them to galvanize each other's efforts. And many countries have ministries that is called ministries in charge of public administration reform. It would be good to look into those ministries to see if at all they have leadership and the management among their priority areas. And how could we draw from the best practices to really promote those practices and ensuring that every year you can have one or two more countries on board to apply leadership and management as a priority area. So back to you, Rob.
Fatoumata, thanks very much. Very thoughtful. And again, I think this idea that leadership needs to be through a whole system, from all the way from national level down to the periphery, I think is very powerful. And this idea of accountability that you wove in, I think, is a really important component of leadership and one we need to pay a lot of attention to. And I think you're right about this issue of, countries just operating in emergency mode, and we see how that's played out poorly. I mean, it's not done well. And then, I think you're highlighting COVID, and the report, also highlights that, if you look at how COVID played out in different places, it was really all about visionary leadership and meticulous management. And, those are the things that really determine the trajectory of the pandemic. So they're very, very compelling remarks. Margarita, before we sort of turn to breakout groups, we'd love to hear from you and hear, what have you learned through your own leadership journey? You've been in the public sector, and now in your current role, where you're developing local leadership capacity, which is a very important, very important issue. And that's what I think Fatoumata also speaking to. This is not just talking about national leadership. We need leadership at every level, and local leadership is really critical. And how do you see that as helping to drive systemic change in education in the context of Colombia?
Thank you, Robert. So as Robert was saying, I had the privilege of working in the public sector for many years before I joined Enseña por Colombia 5 years ago. And the last place I worked was at the Ministry of Education. And when I arrived at the ministry, was the start of a new administration. And basically what I saw, I know happens in almost any national agency in Colombia and probably in Latin America, is that when a new minister is appointed, basically they create a team of what they believe are like rock star leaders that arrive with them to the ministry. They are advisors or contractors. And this team, basically, they appoint them to the most important positions within the ministry and to the most important initiatives or projects that they're gonna develop. Obviously, I mean, and they leave behind a little bit these other civil servants that are there that have been working at the ministries for many, many years, that know how the system works, but maybe they don't fit like the leadership profile that they want, or they don't have the skills or the leadership that they need to lead those very specific initiatives and strategies. So obviously I reflected a lot back then and now about these type of arrangements that that occur in public sector in Latin America. And they have both very good things, but also pitfalls. So obviously they brought to the ministry people with a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a very clear purpose. There was a lot of alignment between that group of people. They brought people who had skills that they didn't found in the civil servants in the ministry, and skills that were very difficult even to find in Colombia back then. People who had like a proven record of leadership in the public sector or in the private sector, in the social sector, that basically these were people who made things happen and who had proven results that they were able to do that. And for example, at the time, we were a group of people who had returned from doing a master's degree outside from Colombia. And also back then we brought a lot of alumni from Enseña por Colombia, from the first cohorts also to like more junior positions, but they also helped us a lot to implement major initiatives. However, there were a lot of problems with the arrangement. Normally, these people don't last long. They burn out very, very easily. And they don't stay. And I mean, maybe they stay until the new administration arrives, but it's very difficult for them to remain in the system once the administration changes. These people also rotate between the public sector, the private sector, or the social sector, or the international NGOs. Which is great because they also, like what you were saying earlier, Robert, they cross-pollinate the system. So they bring all their knowledge to the public sector, to the private sector, or to the NGOs. But in the end, we are not really building capacity within the civil service and the people who are really working in the ministries. And the other thing was, and this is more a reflection I did once I was in Teach for All, is that most of these people come from very privileged backgrounds. So these are people who have social capital, who have connections that allows them to know the new minister or know the new head of an agency. And that's why they are able to arrive to these rockstar teams. So based on this experience, which, as I said, I know that not only happened back then in the ministry, but happened normally in public sector in Latin America, I can think of 4 like main recommendations. One, we really need to create a real and effective channels to connect these leadership pipelines, such as the Teach for All programs or the Global Health Corps and others, to become real, like effective channels of recruitment for the system. So I think that definitely mentoring and coaching programs can be a mechanism to connect many of these programs with the civil service. But we need also more institutional mechanisms that really change the way that the public sector recruits talent. We need like a very profound visionary reform, because if not, we're gonna still be recruiting people that maybe don't have the skills, that maybe don't have the right motivations as well to join the civil service. On the other hand, we need also to transform the system for the public servants and for the civil servants that are already working in the agencies and in the ministries. So we need to, instead of focusing on training them on the things that they cannot do or what the law says that they have to do, we really need to focus on developing their leadership skills. And as you were saying before, this definitely requires investment on one side, but it also requires rethinking the design of the development of leadership within the public sector. We need, obviously, that part of these trainings are very focused on the purpose of the work, on the passion and the energy and the inspiration that these people need, because obviously they've been there for many, many years. They're tired, they don't believe in the system, they know how difficult it is to make things happen. So, and I think on that hand, programs as Teach for All are very good at keeping people really connected with the purpose, really connected with the energy and the passion, and also helping them connect with the communities and the people they serve. I think this is something that we do really well, and that bring part of this knowledge of Teach for All and other similar programs to these public sector organizations would be great to help those civil servants really have the energy and the inspiration and the purpose they need. The third recommendation would be, I think that movement between sectors is extremely valuable, but we definitely need the system to retain the talent. So we need to avoid burnout. We need to promote well-being within the civil servants. We need to build career pathways that are very clear for them and that have clear incentives so that they can see that they can grow. And as I said before, effective leadership development programs that really make a difference for them individually as well. And finally, we cannot forget about the local and regional public sector organizations. These reforms cannot take place only for national agencies. They have also to take place for local and regional, where we find like less capacity, less talent, less people with the skills to support and to strengthen those institutions. In our case, sadly, local and regional organizations is where we see more corruptions. We see more what we say in Spanish, clientelismo, which is I recruit or I hire someone that I know for a political favor. So really focusing on those organizations and how we can help them improve the recruitment and development of leadership and talent is very important. And also, again, connecting with these programs such as Teach for All or Global Health Corps to recruit local talent that is already there in the communities, and that we can help those young professionals see in the public sector a very important route for their own development as professionals. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margarita. And again, as with all of the panelists, I think that, actually it's quite validating for the high-level council, I think, to see that each of you in different contexts, different sectors, different experiences are really echoing many of the same messages. And, I think one of the things that the report really highlights is this sort of twin track that's needed between developing the pipeline of new leaders and also making sure that the people who are already in public service have access to on-the-job development. And there's different pieces of the ecosystem, and I know that in Global Health Corps and Teach for All and its affiliates, very much the pipeline, for AMP, which I'm director of, we working with public sector teams and embedding mentors and coaches with them to really help them on a several-year journey as a team. So it's, again, both individual and collective leadership, and really as part of that, developing skills, but with it confidence to believe that they can actually make a difference in the jobs that they hold in very difficult and challenging environments. So, very, very much agree with what you said. And you talk about passion and energy, and it really is incumbent upon us to figure out how do we create these career paths and that allow people to kindle that passion and maintain it over the course of a career. It's incredibly important, because that is, and you mentioned retention, it's really critical to that. So thank you all. I mean, I think you've all given a tremendous sort of foundation for a conversation. I saw one question in the chat, but I don't see that person on anymore. So I think I'm going to hold that question. And oh, I do see that Haluk is still on. Let me go back to that, because I do want to make sure that we are responsive. Haluk, you had a question for Heather. Do you want to just go ahead and ask that question, and then we'll explain the breakout groups and what we're going to do afterwards. But I do want to make sure that this is a conversation, and we'll have more time for that in the breakouts and afterwards. But please go ahead and ask Heather your question.
Sure. Thank you. Actually, Margarita has also pointed out this as the fourth part. My question is, after we encourage all these leaders and train all these leaders, how do we ensure that they don't change during the course that they become politically involved, especially in terms of their political corruption system, as well as clientelist structures that exist in their countries? Thank
I'm
you.
happy to quickly, thank you so much for the question, to share, and then Margarita too, if you want to add in. I'd say just briefly that I think this is where getting folks early in their career is important, and especially using a very values-based leadership approach. So sort of as talking about before, that it's not just this like top down, it's not just about managing projects, but it's like, how do you enter in this place as an ethical leader, as a moral leader? What does that look like? And then I'd say the second piece that we have seen at Global Health Corps is entering into this work with peers. So, you know, our work is cohort based, you're part of a community, and that sort of puts in some accountability from your peers, because you are going, I mean, we have found that 85% of our fellows stay in the countries of which they've done their fellowship. And so these are people that you are going to be with your careers. And so if you have that orientation of what is it to be entering in the space and doing the work together, I think that's also another way that can help people's moral compasses stay straight. But I'd love to hear what Margarita had to say.
Margarita, over to you for a brief answer, and
Yes.
then we'll go into breakouts.
No, I would say, as Heather said, values and keeping the values and the purpose at the core of, in our case, that 2-year experience and their work as alumni before. I think that is critical. And we talk in breakfast, at lunch, and in dinner about the values and about purpose. So doing that is very, very important. The other thing is that as we are, and as Heather was also saying, we are a very sticky community. So normally these people like go out or become alumni, and they still hang out with the alumni, and they go and work in organizations with the alumni. So there is like social control among them, and they control each other's behavior, and they discuss and they do the difficult questions. So I think that social control within the communities is also very, very important. And obviously we continue keeping them connected with the Enseña, with Teach for All, and we invite them to gatherings and events where we again talk again about the values and the purpose and why we do the work. So I think that component of the training and of the culture of the organization and the movement is key to ensure that alignment.
Great, thanks very much. The vibrancy of this discussion makes me very encouraged about what's going to happen in the breakout groups. We're going to do now is Dylan's going to send us into breakout groups. We decided not to have people select. I think, you know, we think that you'll enjoy whichever one you get thrown into. So we hope that you'll take it in that spirit. We have group 1, which Manuel and I will lead on crises and risks. There'll be a second group on advocating for investment for L&M capacity development that Fatoumata and Dylan will lead, and one on cultivating collective leadership. There's a little bit more of a framing question each of those, but you'll get that in your breakout group as you're thrown in. That one is going to be led by Heather and by Margarita. We originally were envisioning a longer breakout group, but we're a smaller overall group than we expected. And so we think we can shrink that time, and we enjoyed hearing from all the panelists up front. So we're going to give about 15 minutes, Dylan, maybe even a couple minutes. No, I guess 15 is fine. So we'll give 15 minutes to these breakout groups. So Dylan will send us out into breakout groups right now. Then it will be pulled back in 15 minutes. And what we'll do is we're going to ask each group to just give a 2-minute readout. We really want to keep those short, high-level messages that are emerging from those groups, and then really, you know, allow for the conversation to unfold, for questions across groups. And then I'll try and to see if I can sort of bring us back together into some sort of, you know, what's the way forward, what's a call to action for this. So that's the sort of that's the run of show for the next 40 minutes. So Dylan, with that, can we see you again? You will be sending us into breakout groups now, and again, 15 minutes. We'll ask each team lead. So Manuel, you'll report out for our group, Fatoumata from the second group, and Heather and Margarita will leave it to the two of you to decide how to report out from the third group. With that, out we go. Dylan.
Yeah, see you in a few minutes.
On the other side.
Hi, Solomon. Oh, he joined.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to go join room 2.
And I'm going to guard.
Okay, thanks so much. It was amazing to see how as soon as people realized we were going into breakout rooms, they kind of rushed for the door. Okay,
Right.
let me go join that. Right.
Looks like we had pretty good retention there. We got most of us back, I think. Fair number of us back anyway. And sorry, that felt a bit rushed, at least in our group. I was like, I want twice as much time, but we obviously, it's a compressed event. I hope, maybe I'll just say something I didn't say at the beginning, which is, I hope that you all will connect. This can be the starts of conversation. I hope that some collegial relationships and friendships can come out of this. That would be a tremendous outcome from today. And sorry for the noise. I live on a somewhat busy street at rush hour, so it's a little bit loud out there. Let's go ahead and do the readouts fairly quickly, a couple minutes per group, so that we can then open it up for some cross dialogue before bringing it to close at the half hour. So group 1 was us, but Manuel, will you go ahead and just bring out some of the themes that emerged from our discussion? Over.
Sure, thank you, Robert. First thing that I can say is that I felt fully safe because in my group I had just medical doctors, so I felt really safe. But okay, having said that, the point it is that we discussed what are the kind of leaders that at time of crisis demand, no, and we put some ideas and some elements on the table: ability for a quick response, to granted equity access to resources, that can respect rights, that can work in a changing time, integrity, that it is something that in the plenary we discussed, that can bring a multi-sectorial role, among some others. I think that we have learned a lot because of pandemics. But thanks to the contribution in our group, something that raised as a top priority, it is to connect the leader with community. That is key. We have to understand communities. We have to understand their needs. And I think that is something important to continue to strengthen public sector leadership. For sure, one question that it is a $1 million question, it is how can we make a time of crisis a time of opportunity? Or saying in some other way, how can we avoid to have our sustainable process be derailed because of a crisis? And that is happening in the energy sector because of the war in Ukraine. Nobody knows how much bad consequences or negative consequences this could bring. But on the other hand, some people is thinking, okay, this is an opportunity to cooperate. This is an opportunity to create a more well-balanced matrix of energy. So the point is that we do need leaders that can take the crisis time as an opportunity. And finally, I raised something that I again suggest to you to go back into the report that Robert mentioned in the beginning of today's session. What are that kind of elements that we do need to develop? What kind of leaders do we need for this crisis time? People with vision setting ability, strategic planning, project management, and stakeholder management, financial vision, ability to manage risks, ability to innovate, and skills to delegate. For me, those are fantastic recommendations to define how to invest in the new leadership for the public sector in times of crisis. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Manuel. And can you please send me that list? That is such a fantastic, that's really great. Great. Thank you very much. Group 2, so Fatumata and Dylan. Fatumata, are you gonna love to hear your readout on the discussion from your group? Over.
Thank you, Rob. I think, 3 main points on our side as a recommendation. The first thing we discussed is really how do you convince leaders that it's worth investing in leadership and management? We again took the example of Singapore and the Leader in Education program, and also a massive training abroad. So they did, it's not one size fits all, depending on the area and the sector. Some trainings have been done locally with the Leaders in Education program. And the other example was a massive training in the US to ensure that really people in the job already can start learning new skills in terms of leadership and management. So a combination of locally acquired skills or really getting trained abroad. The second thing we discussed was related, to the difficulties of measuring the impact of leadership development, because we talked about having a fact-based approach for advocacy. Therefore, in our conversations, while we are trying to really build facts and have a better measurement of impact of leadership to convince leaders to embark on investing in leadership and management, we could just start with best practices sharing, which, the report is also showing very well that really this could be a way to go and convince leaders. The third thing we discussed with was related to, as currently we know that we train technical people from our schools, unless they go for business schools to acquire leadership and management skills, it's difficult really to get the people really on board as soon as they graduated. So one suggestion was that, based on an example from Mali, maybe, and other countries where they train all together, all graduates from the same year on civil engagement. Really, there is possible then to really add on leadership and management and ensuring that all graduates are trained, because the graduates, they can be from all sectors. The same year you have all sectors graduating, having people graduated. It creates a sense of belonging, it creates a network, and those people can really work together to become great leaders, because networking is a very, very important in leadership. So those are the 3 points we discussed in our group. It was very, very short. We haven't seen time flying. Back to you, Rob.
Thank you. No, great points. It sounds like a wonderful discussion again. That definitely did feel too short. Group 3 on cultivating collective leadership. Heather and Margarita, I'm not sure if you're doing a tag team or which of you is taking this, but love to hear a report out from your group. Over.
Great, thank you, Robert. So we had a tiny group. It was me, Heather, and a couple of folks from our teams, and Solomon from Gambia, and Lovely from Indonesia, and now Germany. And our group was discussing about this term collective leadership. So we started opening the conversation to Solomon and Lovely to hear a little bit about what they understood for collective leadership. so lovely, shared with us a little bit about how leadership in Indonesia is very related to authority and to how we have to respect the elders, and how she has learned now in her work experience that working more horizontally, collaborating, sharing, learning, and creating and understanding more, working across teams is another way to understand leadership now, in comparison to what she had learned in Indonesia. And Solomon also, he said that the concept was very new for him, but that the way he approached the concept was about collaboration and how working with the communities and having a lot of people taking decisions, not just one person, creating solutions among different stakeholders, was what he felt was collective leadership about. And finally, I just shared a little bit more about what in Teach for All and Enseña por Colombia, what we understand collective leadership is, which is basically developing leadership at different levels of the system, not just for the national government and public sector, but also for the local communities. We also work a lot about having our fellows and alumni be locally rooted in the communities where they teach, but also be globally informed about the trends of education, about best practices, about evidence. How diversity and really building a movement that is diverse is at the center and at the core of what collective leadership is. We need people from diverse backgrounds. We need people from who have diverse stories to share. So diversity is very, very important. And finally, this idea of not working for someone's vision, but collectively working for a vision we all create, both at the community and at the national level. So those were some of the ideas we shared about collective leadership. Thank you.
Sounds like a super rich discussion. I'm scribbling lots of notes. Great. Look, we have about 10 minutes left. What I'd like to do at this point is just open it up. I mean, we've had some great introductory remarks. We've had some rich breakouts, and now a chance for cross-pollinating. People who have thoughts that they've had on their mind, during this session, haven't had a chance to say it. Questions people have got in their head that they'd like to pose. So just going to open it up now for a sort of cross conversation. Feel free to raise your hand, or we're actually getting to this sort of a small enough group that you can jump in if there's silence. So please feel free to, there's a hand for lovely, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I want to respond to Ms. Nafo. She said about how the graduates could be like trained together to have leadership skill and so on. I think it's very great ideas. I can share a little bit about the situation in Indonesia. It doesn't mean that Indonesia have prepared to produce many of leader in the future, no, but we have a kind of similar situation there, a strategy there. In Indonesia, all of the university, we have the initiation weeks. And this initiation weeks, we kind of like doing things together from all of the faculties, the new students at the universities. We build kind of like small groups, and we kind of doing things together. Like the senior will give us tasks that we should be accomplished, and we kind of doing it together. There we learn how to networking, and we usually like keep this network long after we study. The second strategy is during almost the final year, we also have this kind of dedication stage to the society that the students on senior year, they have to work on the society that underdeveloped. So they have to create things like building bridges, develop new streets, something like that. Things that very, very useful for this society. These are two strategies that has been implemented in, I think, in almost any university in Indonesia. That's just my experience.
That's great. Yeah, that's Rob. I think that's great. The point Lovely is making, which is really, you know, it's a matter of citizenship, and say that we need to do collective effort to make changes, and that each and everyone is a change agent, and that's really very, very important. Congratulations for that, Indonesia. Back to you, Rob.
No, very agreed. Excellent point. Other comments from people? That was very, very useful contribution. Lovely. Other comments from people? Would love to hear more voices here in plenary.
If not, can I add something, Robert?
Please, it's the floor is open. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know that probably the second million, because I've already made the first million questions, so this is the second million question for today's plenary, that also it is in the report. It is, how can we change the idea and the narrative that we have hard skills and soft skills, no? And probably what we should do it is to change what it is used to being called soft skills into hard, most important, top priority skills. How to do that? How can we create a new narrative for a new kind of leadership?
I think it's a critical question, and you'll laugh because I can't tell you how many times I've jumped on the idea like, don't call them soft skills. This is not, you know, there's no, this makes them seem second tier, and I couldn't agree more. We have to, I think that maybe this begins the sort of narrowing down towards what are we all taking away from today. And I think this is a very nice segue into that, Manuel, is, you know, how do we all become ambassadors for this topic, for this idea that these skills are not peripheral, they're not soft, they are the central skills to achieving what we're collectively talking about. If we're going to tackle the complex problems of today in an incredibly fast changing environment, and actually to turn that on its head, because we always talk about the problems, but my team also hears me say all the time, capitalize on opportunities, right? And you know, Manuel, you spoke to this today. You know, how can we turn this time of crisis into time of opportunity? How do we change that around and say there is a tremendous opportunity here, and doing that means that we need people to have leadership and management skills. And what I'm hearing again and again is that this is not just people in positions of authority, that we often confuse positions of authority with leadership, and those are very different things. Goodness knows in the United States, we've seen people in very serious positions of authority with no leadership skills. So we really need to recognize that leadership is something that is, it can, everybody at every level of the system, whether it's somebody who's a public sector official in a national team or someone who's a community health worker, everybody across that spectrum can exert leadership individually. And the other thing I heard again and again today is collectively, right? This isn't just about someone out there with a flag saying their thing. It's about understanding the context in your working, listening to the people around you, listening to communities and their needs at the end of the day, because it's communities who should hold leaders, who should generate leaders and also hold leaders accountable. We always look at the top down, but it really should be the other way up. How do we create the leadership skills at community level that mean that leaders are held accountable at the community level and all the way up the chain, right? And so that sense of accountability. And I think that, you know, if we are going to you know, seize these opportunities and mitigate the very serious risks, I don't want to minimize the risks that we're facing, then these things are really, really critical. So I think that, you know, if we all coming out of today, that call to action is really, you know, how do we change that narrative around these skills of leadership and management, make them front and center? They are the hard skills, right? They're hard to learn, they're hard to use, and they are hard like a knife in that we can use them, right? How do we get that? And how do we all come out of here as ambassadors for this idea that leadership and management skills are across all the sectors, and we represent diverse sectors here today, critical to achieving ambitious goals and overcoming very, very tricky problems. Fatoumata, I see your hand up, and I don't want to dominate these last few minutes.
Yes, just a quick one, and you know, you touch on my second point. So let me start with the second point. I think we all here, panelists as well as participants, you should be looking at all of us as a change agents. So how do you tap on our skills and our networks to make sure that we infuse the messages where we work, where we live? That's that was my second message. But the first one was to comment on Manuel's point vis-a-vis the soft skills. Really, it's not soft skill. We need really to promote the idea of essential or critical skills, because if you don't have those skills, you know, you can't perform. You can't make a difference if you don't have really those skills. It will just be business as usual. Over.
Thank you. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I promised the organizers we would leave the last couple of minutes for a video around what we're contributing to around Catalyst Change Week and Catalyst 2030. So I want to make sure. The last thing I want to summarize, a word I heard again and again today was network. And I'm going to build that out to a concept of communities of practice. How do we knit ourselves into a global community of practice around leadership and management across sectors, realizing that we need to lean in and manage the change in these turbulent times and come together as a community practice. That network, we can't do this alone, right? But as a network of people committed to this, I think we're capable of tremendous things. So I want to thank very much all the panelists for today. I really appreciate your time and energy. For all of the rest of you for participating and showing up and participating in the breakout groups, to Teach for All for its work in getting us on this journey, and to Dylan for his hard work in organizing as well, and very much to the Catalyst Change Week team. And with that, over to them to show this video before we end. But thank you all.
Thank you, Robert. And yeah, good morning, good day, or good evening to all of you. And I'm delighted that you are all here today. And since I'm a Catalyst 2030 spokesperson, I won't really steal your time, and we'll just show you a short video introduction about the Catalyst, what we do and who we are. So, because we are all here today due to the work of the Catalyst, because this organization just helped to organize all of these Catalyzing Change Week.
Catalyst 2030 is a movement of social entrepreneurs and innovators embracing collective action to achieve the SDGs by the deadline 2030. Our 1,500 members are active in 197 countries. By emphasizing collaborations, Catalyst 2030 is leveraging the power of the collective to accelerate real change in the lives of billions of people around the globe. What do our members say about Catalyst?
Catalyst 2030 is an invaluable global community of impact entrepreneurs.
Our relationship with Catalyst 2030 has really taught us the power of co-creation.
Join Catalyst 2030 and network, bond, and collaborate with our family members.
And I like the spirit of bringing change makers together to share and learn from each other.
Catalyst really understands the transformative nature of collaboration.
It's also a platform that can give us new tools and resources.
Catalyst 2030 has put my work on steroids.
But most importantly, to come up with solutions that are practical, ways where we can really make things happen, because social entrepreneurs are doers.
Are you a Catalyst? Join us to achieve the SDGs.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. And I just want to add that we are still a growing organization and we're connecting with other social entrepreneurs from all over the world. And therefore, I strongly encourage you to join Catalyst so that together we can save the world by delivering the SDGs on time. And yeah, for this purpose, I will post in chat all the necessary links and information on how to join the Catalyst. And moreover, I also invite you to visit our Catalyst information session. It's going to happen tomorrow to listen about who we are in more details. So thank you again, and back to you, Robert.
No, thank you very much. And certainly those messages in your overall thing were very congruent with the messages emerging from this group. So I think it was we were very much, very much in line with the thinking of the week and the movement. And I just want to end by thanking everyone and, please carry this spirit forward. Please carry, this spirit of change and changing the view of leadership and management and its role in achieving everything that we all want to see happen as part of achieving the SDGs. So with that, I know it's late in many parts of the world, and so wish you all the best. And it'd be great if we can figure out ways to keep some of us in contact and working together going forward.
Thank you, friends. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Great.
I may ask you to share this recording with me. I just typed you in the chat about it.
For the recording?
Yes, I just asked you to share this recording with me so we can upload it on our webpage as well as YouTube channel, so the rest of the people in the world can enjoy it.
Okay, great. I've put it on the. It's saved to the cloud.
Great.
I can stop recording now.
Yeah.